I'm a 22-year-old university student living with just my mate. I've lived with a lot of people before and I hated it. So, two lads could be seen as the bachelor's life. I love staying up late, either gaming or just chatting to mates on Skype. My friend, however, is very predictable and goes to bed at 11, shower at 10:30 like clockwork. So I stayed up until 2 a.m. and I have the top floor. The last one to be murdered logic. This has 3 windows, one huge window that is slanted on the roof, that I always keep the blinds open. When I say it's huge, it is. I've often climbed through it to chill on my roof and to watch the stars. There's a lot of space for me. At 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., I climb in bed. Boxers only, and I watch YouTube videos until I drift off, facing away from the window. While watching one and listening to horror stories, I kept hearing a creaking. Assuming it was the video trying to get me in the psychological horror high, I ignored it. The video ended and I was about to choose another longer one, and the creaking came again. The walls are paper thin and I've had a house invasion before, so I was a little on edge. Calming myself down by switching sides, just in case anybody came in my door. It was also the same side as my window. The creaking continued, until it felt like it was in my room. My eyes could not believe what I saw. A dark figure slowly manifested at my window. First a head and then a body, consuming the entire window. I waited and tried to make it out, just staring at it thinking that it was only in my mind. But then a tapping came on the window glass. It was real. I jumped out of my bed, remembering that I kept a knife somewhere in my room. Where was it? I slammed on the lights to see a face looking back at me. "Shota, help!" I screamed. No movement. We stood there looking at each other. "Shota, get in here!" I yelled again. Stood there at my door, practically naked and wondering if I should run or stay where I was. I stayed and Shota never came. The man at my window said, "Hello, excuse me. Let me explain myself." I stood there speechless. "Can you please open the window so I can speak to you?" he pleads. I beckon near the window. "What are you doing on my roof?" I exclaim. "Oh, I'm your neighbor, sorry," he apologizes. I take a second thought, but I open my window. "Sorry, I'm drunk and I'm trying to find my window. How are you?" "You scared the living crap out of me, man. So, do you know Lucien?" I was good friends with my neighbor and he just left for a different university and informed me that other people were moving in. I motioned to get my dressing on, realizing that I was naked. No," he replies as I was getting dressed. "Lucien from next door." He said there would be new people moving in. I questioned. "Oh, yes, Lucien, yeah, I know him," he replies. After talking to him and feeling calm, he said that he must try to find his window when he left. I watch as his black greasy hair and slightly trimmed beard with athletic figure goes to the left. I'll go downstairs to my housemate and yell at him for not coming up. He says that he didn't hear me run down, so there is no need for a panic. Having a laugh about it, I go to my neighbor's house in the morning to joke about it. Knocking on the door, a big slightly fat man answers who I am now friends with, and I ask to see both and introduce myself as the new neighbor. One more person comes down with mousy brown hair, no beard, and is quite small. After meeting them, I later had a small gathering with friends, and when 2 a.m. came, I told them, time to get a little bit back on the neighbors. Climbing out of the window alone, I shuffled to the next window and mischievously knocked on it. I looked inside to see his horrified face, but there was nothing. The room was empty and no one lived there. The landlord told me that the previous tenants were squatters and were annoyed about being moved out for the refurb. That guy was not my neighbor. One summer night when I was around 5 years old, my sister and I awoke to hear something through our open bedroom window. My parents were yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and when they did fight, it was not typically anywhere that there is a chance of us hearing. But this sort of thing did happen from time to time. And though the situation was mildly unusual, we shrugged it off, shut the window, and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about the ordeal. It wasn't until years later we learned the truth about the yelling. As a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I'm a little fuzzy in the details as this all occurred a long time ago, but this is the gist of it. Apparently, at some point in the night, after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electronic interpreter. Basically the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. Understandably, my parents were a little surprised because we didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us. But either way, they had accepted the phone call. I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our house looked like and told my parents that they were hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees that made it hard to clearly see. There were too many places to look, and at this point, the tormentor made it clear that they had intentions of entering our home and dismembering my sister and I. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There was a chance that nobody was out there and that this was all just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they were really where they said they were, and what were my parents doing at that very moment, and what were they wearing and stuff like that. This infection of a human on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing, which was waving his middle finger in the air. Exactly what they were wearing, where certain things on our patio were placed. The expression on my mom's face, every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night, ready to kill any person he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time. So my mom took the phone, which had finally been put down by my dad, and called the police. As brave and stupid as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. The police were not able to trace the call because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it had happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual threat in my backyard? We will never know. This happened this past May. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. The complex has no security guards whatsoever with one other roommate. We'll call the roommate Emily. It's also important to know that a lot of people will ask Emily if we're twins. We look very similar. She and I both spend almost every night at our boyfriend's house and are rarely home. One night around 8:45 p.m., I was home cleaning before I left to go to my boyfriend's house. I ran to get something from my car and came back into my apartment, locking the door behind me. 5 minutes after, I hear a knock at my door. I'm already a paranoid person, so I get a little scared. I knew that it wasn't Emily because she would have called to tell me she forgot her key. I tried to ignore it, and then a second knock. These also weren't innocent knocks. They sounded like a police officer knock. Immediately after the second knock, I FaceTimed my boyfriend. He's convincing me to take a look through the peephole. I take a look and no one is there. I say, okay, I'm going to pack my stuff and then come over. I take 2 steps back from the peephole and then again, I hear banging on the door. Even my boyfriend's face dropped on the phone. I ran and locked myself in the bathroom crying. I didn't get out of there until my boyfriend got there to get me. And when he did, no one was at my door. The next day, my boyfriend and I stopped at my apartment so I could change and get ready for a Cinco de Mayo gathering. There were no knocks that day. The day after I got home, Emily was out getting kitty litter and was going to meet me at the apartment since we were both too scared to be there alone. I get home and I was sitting on my phone scrolling through TikTok. About 10 minutes into the scrolling, I hear that same knock. I look through my peephole and call Emily and describe to her what the guy looked like. She had no idea who it could be. I then watched him walk away and thought maybe that he would stop. Another 5 minutes passed and he was back knocking. I FaceTime Emily again and she tells me to open the door. Don't ever do this. I opened the door and the guy was a bit muscular, looked a little bit older than me, I'm 23, and was someone who I had never seen around my apartment complex before. He seemed shook that I answered. The conversation was, "Oh, is this a bad time?" "Yes." "I was just wondering, do you have a printer?" "No." "Oh, okay." And then he walked away slowly. I also thought it was weird that someone was asking for a printer being that all classes were moved to online format, and we were supposed to be in quarantine. And also, if you needed a printer that bad and someone doesn't answer the first knock, why would you keep trying? Especially when you don't even know the person. We told a bunch of people about the knocking in our complex, and one other apartment said that they had been having the same issues. They were also 2 girls living alone. The next day came and Emily went back with her boyfriend. As she was leaving the apartment, she heard from a balcony next to ours. "Yo, is that her?" She turned around and 2 men ran back inside. We told the apartment complex and called the police. They said they can't really do anything unless the guy is present at our door knocking. After that, we installed a motion detection camera and put up a sign on our window. "We have cameras and you're being recorded." Since then, Emily has moved out. I have 2 new male roommates who are seen coming in and out of the apartment, and no one has came and knocked since. This story happened when I was 15 and totally reckless. I was with my best friend Alice and her neighbor Emily. We decided to try and enter clubs with our fake IDs after discreetly going out of the house by the window. After getting rejected by the security guards at the clubs because obviously we were not looking like 18+ girls, we were wandering the streets not knowing what to do. It was around 1 a.m. and the subway was closed, and we didn't have enough money to get a cab. Plus, we really wanted to party. And Alice wanted to find a new guy because she was heartbroken from her past boyfriend. The last club we tried to enter into was in one of the areas that had a famous bad reputation in the city. It was in Lyon, France. Suddenly, a car stops next to us. The door opens and there are 3 guys inside. 2 of them turn their head and tell us, "Hey, pretty girls, come with us. We have everything you need to get some pleasure. We have some drinks and we can smoke, come." The one at the back looked really muscular and was really insistent. Alice then said, "Let's go, girls, it could be super fun." Then she whispered, "Please, I need some fun, I need a guy to turn the page." She grabbed Emily's arm and went into the car laughing. At this point, I was like, what the heck am I doing? Well, I would rather die with my friends than die alone in the streets, and we all enter the car. In the car, they're trying to flirt with us, but I'm petrified. We say that we're 17 and they tell us that it's the perfect age to party with them. After 15 minutes of them driving to I don't know where, around the city, they say that they want to get some drinks, and that they want to find a cool place. Alice is super happy. Emily and I are relieved that they're going to drop us in a public place like a bar or a club, but they park the car in a car park in the middle of nowhere. They get out of the car and the guys take some bottles from the trunk, mix a lot of stuff inside the glasses, and then give them to us. The one who was driving stays in the car, hands on the wheel, not saying anything. The two other guys start to tell us really inappropriate things, and that they're going to take us to a hotel and that we all looked like we had experience. They were around 35 and we were all 15. They insisted on saying how they would be the best hit of our lives, how they would be in beds, etc. Emily whispers to me that we shouldn't drink, but act as if we're all drinking because there might be something inside of it. Alice starts flirting back and tells them that it's kind of dangerous, but she likes it. At this point, they tell that they're never going to let us go unless we stay with them the whole night. I feel trapped and they ask me to drink insistently. I finally do it and I start to feel dizzy really fast. Everything is blurry around me. I think in a very incoherent way and my stomach hurts. The guys are looking at me as if I was a prey and they were hunting. About 10 to 15 minutes of feeling like this, I tell Alice that we should go and she doesn't look worried at all. I then think that I should sit inside the car, waiting for my fate to do its job. I open the front door and there's still the guy who drove inside. He is listening to the radio and doesn't even look at me when I enter. I asked him, "Why aren't you with your friends?" He turns to me upset and says, "Hey, I don't know who you are and I don't want to know. You told us you were 17, but you look like my younger sister and she just got into high school. I don't know why my stupid friends are stupidly flirting with you, but I'm just waiting for them to stop and drop the three of you in a public place. Once it'll be done, I hope I'll never have to see you again in my entire life." I was shocked and relieved. We stayed there, the both of us, just listening to the radio, and hearing the laughs of Alice to the bad sexual jokes of the muscular guy. I was so dizzy, I was melting into my seat. After maybe 30 minutes, the driver said he wanted to go somewhere, and everybody got into the car. We sat in there and went for about a 10-minute ride, while the two guys were saying what they would do to us once we got to the hotel. The driving guy told them to shut up, and that he was dropping us off in a big place with lots of people. We gave the two guys some fake names for Facebook, some fake phone numbers, and we finally got out of the car. The muscular guy who was in the back tried to grab Emily's arm, but she managed to run outside and get away. They left. The driver looked at me just before and he nodded at me. I was still super dizzy and eventually I threw everything up that I had consumed. Emily didn't believe what had just happened, and Alice was still laughing, saying that was insane. It was like 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and we finally found a real party after that. But to these two guys that wanted to do I don't know what in a hotel, I'm glad that night didn't continue. Or, like the driving guy said, I hope I'll never ever see you again in my entire life. A few years ago, I had just moved into the house that I live in now. I moved in around September and this happened in December. We had just had a large amount of snow, so much so that my work, I'm a librarian, had been closed for the day. I spent the day laying around the house and generally not doing anything unless I had to. My basement is set up as my game or TV room, and it's where I spend most of my days off. I had the TV on, watching something and kind of just laying on the couch. Suddenly, I heard someone banging at the door loud. I could hear it all the way in the basement and above the sound of my surround system. They probably hit the door about 5 or 6 times. Now, I live in a pretty relaxed neighborhood, a super suburban area, and it's quiet as a mouse at night. I had friends dropping by occasionally to see my new house, and so I assumed it was one of them being a dummy and hitting the door as hard as they could to mess with me. Since it kind of annoyed me that they had been so obnoxious about it, I sat and watched some more TV, just to let whoever it was sit out there. And if it was my friend, they would call or text me. And if it was someone selling cookies or something, well, then they could screw off. Why someone would be selling cookies after a snowstorm when the roads were coated in ice, I didn't really think about it. Anyhow, I eventually decided to go up and see if maybe there was something left on the porch or it was a friend and they were waiting for me to open the door. I glanced out of the curtain, but I didn't see anyone, and so I opened up the door. No one was there, and there was nothing on the porch. In the street, covered in snow and ice, mind you, was a black Cadillac with 4 people inside, slowly creeping up the street. One of them was just at that moment climbing in the back of the car as it creeped along. He heard my front door opened and he looked back at me. He just stared at me until they had moved too far up the street for me to see. I thought it was weird, but I just locked the door and went back to my day off. Later that day, it hit the news that further up my street, about a quarter mile or so, there had been a home invasion. A woman had been asleep upstairs at her house, and the 4 people that had thought that her house was empty broke in. They eventually tied her up and robbed her house at gunpoint. She finally did untie herself and went to a neighbor, who called the police and went back over with another gun to check the place out, but they were already long gone. I'm fairly certain that these 4 people were the ones that I saw outside of my house, and if I hadn't decided to go upstairs and open the door when I did, they might have thought that my house was empty and kicked in my door instead. I can still see the guy staring me in the eyes, as if he was weighing the cost of robbing the house with me in it against looking for an easier target. I guess they found one. When I was in college, my junior year, I lived in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom dorm. This is relevant to the story. My roommate and I had roomed together before, so we were pretty good friends. Long story short, we slowly but surely stopped being so close. So, my roommate gets this boyfriend who is like 30 and doesn't go to college at all. He spends the night or whatever, but I don't care, that's her business and our room's locked. Anywho, one night our boyfriend comes over and brings some creepy friend along with him. He was polite, but I didn't want anything to do with him. I made sure to go to bed before they did, so I wasn't stuck out in the living room with him. Because he was spending a night too, and I didn't even want him to think that there was a chance in heck that he could sleep with me. Flash forward to 2 a.m. I hear a knocking at my door. My first thought was, oh heck no, I know it's that dude. So I play dead and I don't move a muscle, hoping that he would get tired of knocking and just go away and go to bed. And the knocking got louder and louder and angrier sounding. Finally, he stopped for a second, and then I hear him turning my doorknob and pushing up against my door. Now luckily, I slept with my door pad locked. Like I said, my roommate and I were not on good terms. Once he figured out that he couldn't break down the door, he just kept knocking all night long. As I laid there in fear that at any moment the door would give. Yes, I did think that maybe he had used the restroom, but he should have asked his friend or went outside. He's a man after all. Finally, morning came and he stopped. I fell asleep for maybe like an hour or so, and then my roommate and her boyfriend come knocking. I opened the door, intending to tell them about what happened last night, but they already knew. My roommate was smiling as she apologized, as if the situation was funny. The boyfriend seemed truly sorry, but the whole situation was just strange. I still to this day think that she was setting me up to get attacked or something. I was home alone one hot summer evening. My parents were out on business and I was enjoying the time alone to do whatever I wanted. Now we lived in a 2-bedroom first-floor apartment at the time. From the front entrance was a hall that opened into the kitchen, and to the left at the far end of the kitchen was my room, and to the right of the kitchen was the living room which connected to a small den. My parents' bedroom was also connected to the living room off to the right. It was around 9 p.m. when I just finished dinner and began my nightly routine of taking out the trash, brushing my teeth, and shutting down for the night. And before retreating to my room, I opened all the windows in the kitchen and living room so that the house would cool down over the night. The windows were all barred, so I wasn't too worried about any funny business happening. I'm a little bit of a security freak, so all the doors in the house have locks, including my bedroom and the bathroom. I shut off all the lights and went to my room to watch TV. At around midnight, I dozed off. I had a weird dream, or rather a nightmare of someone knocking on my door, with the knocking getting progressively louder. It was odd because in the dream, I was laying in my bed but couldn't move. The knocking got so blaringly loud until I couldn't stand it, and then I heard a scream and I woke up. My heart was racing and I was sweating a little bit, but no damage done. I looked around my room and glanced at my alarm, which read 4 a.m. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I brushed the dream off and I laid back down. I closed my eyes and suddenly heard knocking on my actual bedroom door. A little delirious, I thought I had slipped back into my nightmare. My eyes shot wide open and I sat up and stared at my door, trying to listen. There were 3 slow knocks that followed. My very first thought was that my parents were back early with food or something and they wanted me to have some. My dad was notorious for knocking on my door when he got home late at night to check on me, sometimes without calling my name first. I always told him that it spooked me and he should announce himself when he knocks, but he would always forget. I got up and began walking towards the door, but something felt wrong. When my parents come home, there's usually a lot of commotion. They might be having a conversation, or I can hear their keys jingling. My mom's heels, footsteps, something. This time, though, it was dead silent. I stopped halfway to the door and called out, "Who is it?" No answer. I opened my mouth to call it again, but before I could get the first word out there were several rapid knocks on the door. Very persistent knocks, as if it was an emergency, and whoever was on the other side needed to get in now. I felt a lump in my throat. My mind was racing and the first thing I thought of was, what if it was my dad on the other side and he's in trouble? What if he's choking and he can't speak? What if he needs my help? I was frozen in place and I couldn't move. I said, "Who is it?" once more. Again, nothing. "Please say something, please tell me who it is, it's not funny," I said. A few moments of silence went by. Suddenly, it was as if someone threw their whole weight in the door. Rapid, loud bangs began attacking the door. Kicks, punches. It was as if there were 3 people on the other side trying to break the door down. It was so loud that I started crying. I found myself jumping backwards and crawling to the corner of my room. The violent banging went on for a few more moments, and then silence. I sat in the corner, frozen. My hands were covering my mouth and tears were rolling down my cheeks. I thought this was the end. I was shocked that the door still stood because when I heard the first bang, I thought the frame would come crashing down, and whatever was on the other side would instantly enter and end my life. I sat there for a brief period of time that felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard clinking, the sound of metal brushing past each other. I knew whatever was on the other side was going through the silverware drawer. If my life didn't end already, this was my last chance because I wouldn't get another. I sprang up and climbed out of my dresser, sitting against my window. I threw open the curtain and shoved the window down and climbed out as quietly as I could. I fell to the sidewalk and ran to the police station down the road. I was hysterical and told them what had occurred. That night, my parents were called and they did an investigation of my house. The only things out of place were a cigarette butt left at the base of my bedroom door and a butter knife on the kitchen table. In the following months, we moved out of that apartment, and thankfully, I can say that was the most excitement that I had ever been through. I soon went to college, graduated, moved to a new state with my family nearby, and life is continuing on as normal. I never know if it was a prank that night or someone was actually out to get me, but luckily, I'll never find out. About 3 years ago, I lived in a little studio apartment by myself. I had lived there for 1 year in total, and the entire time that I had lived there, someone would knock at my door about once a week, sometimes a few times a week, and occasionally multiple times in the same night. This studio apartment was in an apartment building with only 6 units. There was an old lady who lived across the street from me, a young girl about the same age living above me, and an older couple living next to her. The rest of the apartments were empty during my time there. Shortly after I had moved in, I started to get knocks on the door at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The first time that it happened, I was awake and watching a movie. I had gotten home really late from work and I couldn't fall asleep. I heard 3 firm knocks on the door. It was late and I'm a female and I live alone, so I definitely wasn't going to answer it. It was so loud that I was even too scared to go and look through the peephole in the door. My dog started to bark, so I shushed him and made him get into bed with me. And we get under the covers and I'm absolutely petrified. He's still barking, but the knocking didn't continue. I texted my boyfriend about it, but he's asleep, so he doesn't reply until the next morning. He tells me that it was probably someone who had the wrong apartment, and that made sense. Weeks go by before anything else happens, but it definitely did happen again. This time, I'm asleep. It's late and I hear firm knocks on my door. My dog is barking, so I grab his collar and push him in his kennel, which is on the way to my front door. I go and look through the peephole, but there is no one standing in front of the door. Now I'm really freaked out now. I go look out the only window that I have in the whole apartment, which faces the parking lot. There are no extra cars, bikes, motorcycles, etc. I called my boyfriend because at this point, I was too scared to even go to sleep. He assures me that it must be someone who was looking for another apartment. I mean, what else could it be? Months and months pass and this happens all the time now. I had spoken with the landlord on many occasions and they assure me that it isn't them, and that it's not one of their maintenance men. I had begged to get out of my lease, but I wasn't able to. My boyfriend never spent the night, he's Catholic, but about 10 months into my lease, his family has a big birthday party for his younger sister, and he agrees to spend the night at my apartment so that some family coming in from out of town can sleep in his bed. We stayed up late watching movies, and again, at around 2 or 3 in the morning, there is a heavy loud knock on my door. I look at my boyfriend in a kind of, "see, I told you" sort of way. He gets up and opens the front door quickly, maybe thinking that he can catch the person that's doing this, but no one's there. It's cold out that night and it's quiet, and we don't hear anyone walking around. Nobody talking or getting into the car. Nothing. We get back into bed and fall asleep. Around 5 a.m., someone knocks on the door again. This time it's quieter. My boyfriend decides to call the police. We call, they come out, and they search around the vicinity of the place and said that they didn't see anyone hanging around. The next morning, as we're leaving, my neighbor, whose front door is directly across from mine, the old lady, is also leaving. She doesn't speak English, so I've never really talked to her. But my boyfriend asks her in Spanish if she has had anyone knock on her door. She tells him no and asks why he's asking. He tells her that for the last year almost, I've had someone knock on my door at least weekly. She tells us that she's sorry she didn't see or hear anything, but that she'd let us know if she does. A couple of weeks later, I let my landlord know that I would not be renewing my lease. My boyfriend asked if we could move into a new place together, and I happily agreed. A month later, the night before I moved, I was up late packing so that I could be early the next morning and be ready. My dog was already at the new place with my boyfriend, so I was all alone. There were 3 knocks and then it stopped. I flicked my porch light on through the peephole. Again, no one was there. I felt a little less scared knowing that I wouldn't be sleeping here again. But I never found out who was knocking at my door or why. To this day, it completely baffles me. I've thought of every possible reason and I have no idea why. For an entire year, someone would continuously knock on my door almost weekly. After I moved away, it stopped and it never happened again. For background and relevance to the story, I live on a private drive. It's not gated, with 3 houses on it. My house is number 3, the last house. At the time, my first neighbor had a stay-at-home mom, and she worked from home, so they were always at home. And my second is an elderly lady who was always at home as well. So you would have to walk up the drive and past the other 2 of my neighbors' houses to get to mine, the last one. Also, as our house is at an angle, when you stand at the front door face on to the left down the side of my house, you can see our back gate which enters into our back garden and our back door. So, growing up, I had a pretty disruptive childhood. Parents with a volatile relationship and alcoholic mother, etc., a messy divorce. This had quite an adverse effect on myself and I had depression since a young child, maybe 8 years old from what I can remember. When I was around 12, I left secondary school, and I proceeded to stay at home all day every day for the next 4 years, having little to no interaction with anyone, unless it was over the internet. My mother had no choice but to go to work and to leave me at home. Because we live on a private drive, the only people who knock on the door are the postman or a neighbor or a guest who we are expecting. One weekday, I was home alone as usual when I was maybe 13-ish. It was the early afternoon. I had someone hammering on our front door so dramatically, it was like they were going to knock it down. As my bedroom window overlooks the front of the house, I peeked out of the window and saw that there was a woman standing there waiting for someone to answer. She was in her mid-30s maybe, with medium brown hair and carrying a bit of weight. Pretty ordinary looking if I'm honest. But I wasn't going to answer the door to this woman. I was a very anxious child, so I always had my wits about me. And my mom told me to never answer the door to anyone when she wasn't home. The knocking stopped, and I thanked God for that and that she had gone away. But the next thing I know, this woman had walked down the side of my house, opened our back gate, and started frantically banging on our back door, which is primarily glass, so it sounded awful to me at the time. I crept into my mom's bedroom, which overlooks my back garden, and this woman was just standing at the back door frantically hitting it. Safe to say, stranger danger. I did not answer the door to her, and the woman eventually went away. Still to this day, this sits really uncomfortably with me. I never mentioned it to my mom, and I never really thought that much about it at the time other than, well, that was odd. and I think about this at least every few months as an adult. What the heck did this woman want? And why was she in such a panic, or why was she angry? Why did she bypass both my neighbors' homes and just start banging on our front door, and then run around to the back of the house and did it on the back door? I just really didn't understand it. It was creepy for me,